stand up straight while working. To make matters worse, the average worker was about 15 years old, and they were working 15 to 16 hours a day for wages so low they couldn't even afford a single bowl of soup after a full day's work. 500 workers shared a single bathroom, so people avoided drinking water just to avoid bathroom trips during their shifts. So Tae tried everything to expose the working conditions of the people. He went to a radio station, no interest. He approached a major newspaper, but still nothing changed. So he tried to organize a street rally. Police denied permission. So on November 13th, 1970, Tae came up with a plan. He was going to burn a copy of the labor standards law during a public demonstration. Now, this law technically existed on paper to protect workers' rights, but clearly nobody was actually enforcing it. So Tae's message was pretty simple. If this law is worthless, let's literally burn it to show everyone how meaningless it is. But the plan leaked to the police, who swarmed the protest sites and prevented workers from showing up. When the protest was about to fail completely, Tae poured gasoline over his own body and set himself on fire, running through the streets shouting, "Obey the Labor Standards Act. We are not machines. Let us rest on Sundays." He was rushed to the hospital, but died 9 hours later from severe burns. As he lay dying, surrounded by his mother and friends, his famous final words before losing consciousness were, "I'm hungry." Tae's death planted a seed. You see, he became a symbol, proof that workers could no longer tolerate their suffering. Throughout the 1970s, that seed grew. Other workers started organizing. Students began infiltrating factories to support labor movements, and the resistance was building momentum. Then in 1979, things reached a boiling point. Female workers at a company called YH Trading suddenly faced unemployment when their bosses secretly diverted company funds. Nearly 200 women sought refuge at the headquarters of the main opposition political party to Park's regime to draw public attention to their plight. In response, Park sent riot police to storm the opposition party's building and forcibly remove the female workers. During the chaotic raid, a 21-year-old worker fell from the building and died. It's not clear from the historical record whether she fell accidentally or was pushed, but either way, her body showed signs of severe beating, and the Park regime had gone too far this time. The violent crackdown on both the female workers and the opposition party triggered massive protests across the country. Thousands of citizens burning police stations and government buildings in the largest anti-government demonstration since Park took power. Now, there's a lot more to the story, but on October 26, 1979, during a heated dinner argument about how to handle the protests and other internal disputes, President Chung-hee Park was assassinated by his own intelligence chief. Now, I need to be clear on this point. The workers hadn't assassinated Park directly, but their resistance and the government's violent overreaction had created the political chaos that ultimately brought the Park regime to its knees. The labor movement that Park thought he had crushed had helped topple one of Asia's most powerful and economically successful countries. Now, here's the thing. The workers it got way worse, because within months of Park's assassination,
Stay alert. You've being tagged by a hostile cyberlimb.
dreadful days were coming where victims and perpetrators have to work side by side. If you think that was an isolated incident, I'll give you another example. WeWork, the now infamous co-working space company that spectacularly collapsed from a $47 billion valuation to bankruptcy, actually has an office in Korea. Between 2010 and 2020, WeWork laid off over 4,000 employees globally, roughly 1/3 of its entire workforce, as it desperately needed to survive. In the UK, Canada, and across Europe, thousands lost their jobs virtually overnight. But in South Korea, WeWork Korea offered voluntary severance packages to all Korean staff in 2020 and 2021, with the US headquarters reportedly wanting to exit the Korean market entirely. The problem was that WeWork Korea employees could simply refuse the packages, and Korean labor law gave WeWork no way to force them out. The company couldn't prove urgent managerial necessity specifically for Korea and couldn't meet the fair selection criteria for mass layoffs. Even this tiny country in Southeast Asia with a population of 5.9 million people is experiencing a very unusual immigration trend from the rest of the world. Right now, across the US, Europe, and even in countries like Japan and Australia, you're seeing anti-immigration sentiment and protests everywhere. These are often driven by working-class citizens who associate the word immigrant with poor or undocumented workers who they fear will take their jobs away, drive up housing prices, and strain public services. But in Singapore, the story is completely flipped. The so-called immigrants are the ultra-rich. To be fair, this isn't a brand new phenomenon. Some of the world's wealthiest people have been planting their flags in Singapore for over a decade. Back in 2009, Eduardo Severin, whom you might recognize as the Facebook co-founder portrayed in The Social Network,
Wired in. Is he? Yes.
renounced his US citizenship and made Singapore his permanent home. In 2019, James Dyson, the British vacuum tycoon, moved his company's headquarters to Singapore and bought the country's most expensive penthouse for $54 million. But what used to be a handful of headline-grabbing billionaires has now become a full-on wave. In 2024 alone, about 47 billionaires and more than 3,400 millionaires moved to Singapore. And as of 2025, Singapore is home to 49 billionaires out of the roughly 3,000 billionaires worldwide. The total number of millionaires even more staggering, over 240,000 as of 2025. Now, just to put that in perspective, Singapore has just 5.9 million people, yet its share of global billionaires is about 22 times higher than its share of the world's population. At this point, you might be wondering, why would that even be a problem? Like, if wealthy people bring their money into a country, isn't that a good thing? Well, it depends on just how much wealth we're talking about. Just in 2024 alone, these new billionaires and millionaires brought with them an estimated $150 billion in wealth. For a city-state of 5.9 million people, that's an economic tidal wave, equivalent to almost 1/3 of Singapore's entire GDP arriving in a single year. So when a single year of immigration brings in wealth equal to almost 1/3 of your entire GDP, it's hard to see that as luck or accident. The real question is, how did they do this? And what does it mean for ordinary Singaporeans now living in a country increasingly shaped by billionaires? Let's break it down. Starting with one of the main drivers of Singapore's wealth boom that most people outside finance have never heard of, the family office. First, it's important to note that starting a family office is actually one of the 3 ways the ultra-wealthy can qualify for permanent residency in Singapore under what's called the Global Investor Program. What's interesting about this program is that it's highly exclusive. Singapore only approves a few hundred a year, which makes it feel more like a private club than a typical visa scheme. So let's take a look at 3 options. Option A is to invest at least 10 million Singaporean dollars, about 7.5 US dollars, into a new or existing Singapore business. And it can't just be a shell. That business has to employ at least 30 people, and at least half of them must be Singaporean citizens. Option B is to put down 25 million Singaporean dollars, roughly about 18 million US dollars, into. On July 17th, 2025, Minho Park, a 22-year-old college student from South Korea, stood at Incheon Airport about to say goodbye to his family. It was going to be his first time traveling overseas, and he was buzzing with anticipation and excitement. Park's destination, Cambodia. You see, his trip came up rather unexpectedly. A senior at the university told him about a short-term expo opportunity available in Cambodia. The job was presented not as a permanent position, but as short-term event-related work, helping with coordination and promotion. After introduction, Park communicated with the recruiter via telephone and received what appeared to be official-looking documents with assurances that all travel details, including airfare, would be taken care of. Park, described by friends as quiet and quietly ambitious, was eager for a large experience and the chance to earn money. The money is hard to reproduce. It's not exactly how much he was offered, but he was likely promised high short-term payouts with monthly salaries up to 10,000 US dollars every month, which is a lot. And looking like at least 5 times what someone of Park's age can make in South Korea. So on July 17th, 2025, Minho Park said goodbye to his family and left for Cambodia. When his flight landed in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, Park was met with individuals who claimed to be company recruiters and taken away in a van. That was the last time he was seen alive in public. Soon after, Park's family in Korea received an anonymous call. The caller claimed Park had caused trouble and demanded a ransom of 50 million won, or roughly 35,000 US dollars, threatening harm if the money was not paid. Park's family reported the incident to Korean authorities, but communication with the kidnappers was cut off after 4 days. On August 8th, Cambodian police discovered a pickup truck on a remote road near Bogor in Kampot province, a region well known for illegal scam compounds. Inside was Park's body. The autopsy confirmed that Park died of cardiac arrest caused by extensive torture and physical abuse. Cambodian authorities arrested 3 Chinese nationals linked to Park's death and charged them with murder and drug trafficking. It is estimated based on survivors' accounts that Park is just one of over 1,000 young Koreans currently believed to have been trafficked in captive labor camps, forced to work in scam compounds, and subjected to violence if they resisted or tried to escape. The victims are not only Korean, but also include large numbers of Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipinos, and other Southeast Asians. The murder of the young Chinese man who was beaten to death while trying to escape a scam compound in Cambodia was reported by rescued Korean victims. News of Park's death ignited a media firestorm and national outrage in South Korea, exposing one of the largest modern-day human trafficking and cybercrime rings in Southeast Asia. Families of other missing Koreans came forward, and videos released by rescued victims described the same recruitment pattern. Offers made through social media and Telegram, leading to forced labors in Cambodian scam compounds. Even regular Korean tourists began reporting unsolicited messages received right after entering Cambodia, advertising high-paying part-time work, suggesting whoever's behind this may have access to traveler information and networks. So, what the hell is really happening in Cambodia? Who's behind these operations, and how did the US and UK end up getting involved in this, freezing roughly $15 billion in crypto assets in the process? It turns out that Cambodia, which I knew very little about until now, is a magnet for Chinese criminal gangs and global scam operations. To understand why, you need to look at its modern history, a history marked by war, chaos, and corruption. Cambodia's troubles began decades ago. Let's break this down, starting before 1970. You've probably heard of the Vietnam War, right? Cambodia actually shares a long border with Vietnam. Under the leader Prince Norodom Sihanouk, Cambodia tried to remain neutral during the Vietnam War, but permitted North Vietnamese troops to use its territory for supply routes and sanctuaries. Many right-wing politicians, military leaders, and city residents in Cambodia resented this and believed that Sihanouk was endangering national sovereignty and favoring communists. In 1970, while Prince Sihanouk was out of the country, General Lon Nol, with the backing of US-leaning elites and tacit US support, staged a coup, overthrew the prince, and established a pro-American government. Lon Nol then tried to drive out the North Vietnamese troops but failed, so the US responded by launching heavy bombing campaigns in Cambodia, targeting Vietnamese communist bases along the border. In retaliation and to protect their supply lines, North Vietnam gave increased support to a Cambodian communist movement called the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge gained strength, numbers, and territory partly due to rural anger over the destruction caused by US bombing and the Lon Nol government's brutality. This triggered a bloody civil war between 1970 and 1975, during which around 275,000 to 310,000 people died from violence and chaos. The US-backed Lon Nol regime fought a losing war against the Khmer Rouge, who were backed by North Vietnam and China. On April 17, 1975, the Khmer Rouge won the civil war by capturing the capital of Cambodia and overthrowing the US-backed Lon Nol regime. They then immediately implemented radical violent policies to create an extreme communist society. The Khmer Rouge sought to create a classless agrarian utopia, abolishing private property, religion, and traditional family structures. Over 2 million city dwellers were forced into the countryside for hard labor, labeled new peasants. The regime was deeply suspicious of dissent. Anyone perceived as opposing it, or even simply educated, such as teachers, lawyers, doctors, monks, or people who wore glasses because they looked intellectual, was targeted, arrested, tortured, and executed. This is why, even today, you supposedly don't see many people wearing glasses in Cambodia, even as fashion statements, because of that painful history. Maybe some of you watching from Cambodia right now can fact check me on this. Anyway, many people were executed simply because of their background or any perceived Western ties. Minority groups, including Cham Muslims, Vietnamese, Chinese Cambodians, Christians, and Buddhists, faced a brutal persecution. The Khmer Rouge sought to erase all religion and class distinctions, literally by killing anyone who represented them. The massive forced relocations, disastrous agricultural experiments, and labor camps led millions to starvation, disease, and death. From 1975 to 1979, between 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians died out of a total population of about 7 to 8 million. That's nearly a quarter of the population wiped out in just 4 years. The Khmer Rouge was finally overthrown in 1979 after Vietnam invaded Cambodia and toppled the regime. Vietnam occupied the country and installed a communist government, but persistent guerrilla warfare, international isolation, and pressure from the US and China eventually forced Vietnam to withdraw its troops in 1989. With Vietnam gone, global powers brokered peace accords in the early 1990s. The UN supervised elections, monarchy was restored, and Cambodia transitioned towards a constitutional monarchy and multi-party democracy. But by then, after years of brutal civil war and the nightmare of genocide, Cambodia spent the 1980s and early 1990s devastated by poverty and instability. When a society loses both structure and trust, corruption and crime becomes almost inevitable. With an empty treasury, a broken legal system, and public officials paid less than a living wage, bribery and patronage turned into survival mechanisms. A favor, a connection, or a payment becomes the only way to get things done. Ministries, police, courts, and businesses soon began intertwined in a web of personal loyalty and kickbacks rather than laws and merit. Even the new democratic government that emerged in the early 1990s couldn't root out such deeply institutionalized corruption. So when Cambodia welcomed major foreign investment and aggressively courted infrastructure money from China in the 2000s, without first addressing its deep corruption crisis, it not only brought billions of dollars for roads, bridges, and buildings, but also attracted a wave of Chinese businesses looking for a place to conceal illicit activities. Special economic zones sprang up in places like Sihanoukville and the Golden Triangle, where casinos, luxury hotels, and online betting operations flourished. These zones, often loosely regulated and physically walled off, became magnets for questionable Chinese investors who had little interest in legitimate trade. That's when Chinese criminal syndicates truly took root. Groups with names like Prince Group, which I'll come back to later, set up sprawling casino resorts, real estate operations, and behind closed doors, cyber scam compounds and forced labor camps. Local Cambodian authorities, often corrupt or complicit, provided protection. Okay, so you have all these Chinese criminal syndicates doing their thing that's confined to specific regions of Cambodia, but how did that turn into this global scam empire that involves human trafficking and forced labor? What was the trigger? By the late 2010s, Cambodia's casino towns, flush with Chinese cash, was thriving on gambling and luxury real estate. But something happened in 2018. President Xi Jinping of China ramped up a sweeping crackdown on corruption and organized crime across China, targeting both criminal syndicates and the officials who protected them. Police and prosecutors launched mass arrests and asset seizures, especially against groups involved in gambling, money laundering, and cross-border scams. This Chinese government campaign squeezed criminal gangs out of China's rapidly closing gray zones. Many syndicates and the businesses tied to them began searching for safe havens abroad. Some considered relocating to countries like the Philippines, but President Duterte had already declared war on crime and corruption after taking office in 2016, launching a nationally publicized crackdown on criminal networks, drug syndicates, and corrupt officials. So that wasn't the best place. In contrast, Cambodia, with its booming gambling industry, loose regulations, and history of official corruption, naturally emerged as a new sanctuary for Chinese organized crime. Then in 2019, Beijing pressured Cambodia to ban online gambling, determined to curb cross-border betting that was draining cash from China and contributing to domestic crime. Overnight, hundreds of Chinese casino investors, operators, and criminal organizations in Cambodia lost their main revenue source. In response, the same casino structure, hotel towers, and walled compounds quickly pivoted to cyber scams and human trafficking. Former gambling halls became call centers and scam factories, often run by the same syndicate and protected by the local officials. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the shift. As travel and legitimate gambling dried up, organized crime groups found that online fraud, especially crypto and investment scams, was far more lucrative and harder to police. Cryptocurrency enabled fast, anonymous payments and quick laundering of proceeds, making it easier than ever to move illicit cash beyond the reach of Cambodian and Chinese authorities. By 2021, Cambodia's special economic zones were no longer just casino hubs. They had become the nerve centers of industrial-scale scam compounds. Human trafficking exploded as criminal gangs lured foreign workers with fake job ads and forced them into running global scam operations targeting victims from the US to Europe to Asia. So if you've ever received a random text about crypto investments, some job opportunities abroad that sounds way too good to be true, or had some fake profiles reaching out to you on dating apps or Telegram, chances are you've seen the shadow of Cambodia's scam empire. At the center of this global web is the Prince Group, a Cambodian conglomerate founded and chaired by Chen Zhu. Chen Zhu is 37 years old, was born in China and holds both British and Cambodian citizenships. Right now, he's facing charges from both the US and UK for orchestrating one of the world's largest financial fraud and trafficking networks, as well as wire fraud and money laundering. He has not been captured and currently is still at large. The Prince Group quickly built a vast business empire in Cambodia, dominating real estate, banking, casinos, and infrastructure. On the surface, their businesses appear totally legitimate, and Chen Zhu has long presented himself as a philanthropist in Cambodia, providing millions of dollars for COVID-19 relief, donating medical equipment, building schools, and supporting charity projects in Cambodia. Beneath the surface, however, US and UK prosecutors allege that the Prince Group is the epicenter of industrial-scale scams and human trafficking, laundering billions through over 100 shell companies across the globe. Their networks have acquired luxury properties in Phnom Penh and central London, and allegedly bribed officials to operate within India. Authorities in the US and UK believe the Prince Group scam operations cover more than 30 countries. Thousands of forced remote running online scams, from high-security compounds inside Cambodia's special economic zones. So what kind of scams are we talking about here? There are many, but I'll just go through a few examples. First, there are romance scams or pig butchering. The term pig butchering comes from a Chinese phrase meaning killing pig plate. It describes how scammers fatten up their targets, much like farmers fatten a pig before slaughter. It often starts with totally casual.
area is advised. Armor plates destroyed. Initiating system shutdown.
US and UK launched one of the largest in modern history. But why now? Well, it's a matter of national interest for both the US and UK. The US Treasury reported that Americans alone lost over $16 billion to online investment scams last year. More than $10 billion of that linked directly to Southeast Asian scam centers like those run by similar massive losses in the UK and other allied nations. These scams have wiped out retirement funds, college savings, and in some cases, entire livelihoods for tens of thousands of Americans and British citizens. The US and UK working together froze about $15 billion in Bitcoin tied to Cambodia's Prince Group and froze about $130 million in London real estate linked to the network. According to the US Department of Justice, this represented the largest forfeiture action in the department's history. They also sanctioned at least 146 individuals and over 100 entities affiliated with Prince Group and initiated asset freezes and investigations spanning London and other global financial centers. Even China, already known for its tough stance on organized crime and corruption, is escalating enforcement. Now, if you're a criminal in Cambodia, you know you're in some deep shit when China's on your ass. Chinese authorities have confirmed mass deportation of criminals from Cambodian scam centers. Over 130 suspects flown back to China aboard government-sanctioned fleets for prosecution. Beijing's tougher tone signals that the issue has become too big to ignore, driven by public outrage over Chinese victims and international embarrassment over how these criminal networks with Chinese origins have come to dominate the global scam economy. The result is a rare moment of the US and China working together against
Realized. position. Hostile cyberliv is tracking you. Taking countermeasures or leaving area is advised. Danger. You've been detected by a cyberliv. Position.
They wanted to signal.
Strike incoming. Initiating system shutdown. Hostile cyberliv is tracking you. Taking countermeasures or leaving area is advised. Biological functions not detected. Danger. You've been detected by a cyberliv. Death detected. Initiating system shutdown. Target biological functions not detected.
Think about that for a second. The CEO of Starbucks himself made it a point to visit China regularly to understand local customs, build relationships, and learn how people actually think. So if you're someone who's remotely interested in doing business in China or just visiting, you should probably do what Howard Schultz did in spirit, learn the language. And that's where our sponsor, Preply, comes in. Mandarin can feel pretty intimidating at first, but Preply makes it personal. You can choose from over 5,500 online Chinese tutors who can tailor lessons to your exact goals. Whether that's mastering business Mandarin for